Well, good morning. Welcome back to my studio. It's time to start another little painting today. We're actually going to be releasing some open edition paper prints on our internet Shopify store shortly. So I'm doing a few more little ones. So we've got a little bit more to choose from for those paper prints. So stick around and I'll start to block this in and talk about a little bit about the composition and about how I start the paintings. Okay, so I'm going to start a new piece. You can see my photo here. I've got it squared off with two vertical and two horizontal lines, dividing it in thirds. I also have that same thing on my canvas, which just makes it a little easier to kind of landmark. Now I'll put up on the video a better version of the photo so you can see what I'm working from. This piece is pretty typical for the type of stuff I do, except there's a few things that are a little different here. One is that it's all birch trees in my photo, and I think I might actually go ahead and do that. Usually I have a mix of the birch trees and the hardwood trees. The other thing is that typically I like stuff more in the reds and oranges, and this was from last fall up at Batchewana Bay, where fall was really late coming, so everything was still pretty green and yellowy green, even into the first week of October. Okay, so let's just talk about what I use to block in my paintings. I'm just going to kind of come down here a bit. And you can see I just use a paper plate. I don't bother using a palette for this. And I've just got some purple fluid acrylic squeezed out. Just have a little jug of water. And then I have some paper towels to dry my brush off with. And that's it. And as for brushes, these are just hog bristle brushes, the same ones actually that I use for my oil paintings. I just use the same ones, and as they get full of paint and start to get dry and stiff, then they're really good to use for drawing. So I quit using ones like this for the oils and use them more for the acrylic. But then I still need some of these softer ones for some of the foliage type stuff I want to do with the blocking. So the first thing that I do typically is block in the kind of horizon line about where the sky is going to poke through and where it is not going to poke through, to just give me that line. And that's generally better not to be kind of a straight line across if there's some kind of movement to it. And for that, let's just block in, and I typically do that in the purple. Now if I'm using a photo where there's a lot of hardwood trees as well, the darker black trees, then the trees will be kind of blocked in the black as opposed to the purple. But everything here, because everything's going to be birch trees, I'm going to do them all in the purple. And then I need to block in, and then I typically start with my biggest trees first, and so this is going to be a big thick birch tree. And with the birches, you notice that I kind of do these little herky-jerky strokes that leave these little edges and slight changes of direction on there. They're really good. They're a really good place later on to put like the scars on a birch tree. And as always, I want to make sure my tree is, however thick it is up top, it needs to continually get thicker as we come to the bottom, because that's what trees do. And just another scar there. And I've got another smaller tree here. This one actually gets quite a bit thicker faster as we come down. And as I've mentioned before, this is the most important part of any painting, is the actual composition of blocking it in. So even though I might go fairly quickly, I'm still really paying particular care here. And if I do make a mistake, the reason I go quick is sometimes those gestural strokes are better than the one where you kind of take too long and labor over it. But if I'm not happy with a stroke, then I immediately get in and wipe it off with a Q-tip. And because I'm dealing with acrylic, I've got a short window of where I can do that. Probably for 2 or 3 minutes, I can still get in and erase a stroke that I've made. And again, I'm looking to avoid tangents and parallel lines. So you notice this just comes slightly in. This was almost going on a tangent, so I brought it in a little closer. And we've got another small birch here. Now I'm actually not 100% sure if I'm going to leave these all as birches at the end, but I think I might like to try doing that, just because I don't know if I've ever done a piece like this where it's all birches. And I like to think of this, if you think of like a building or a skyscraper where they do all the metal girders and the support work, that's what this is. And this has to work on its own as a kind of a graphic composition. And if there's anything that looks out of balance, or that just, again, I'm looking for those things that I don't want to happen. I don't want tangents. I don't want parallel lines or kind of concentric curves. And I also want it to encourage the eye to move around the painting. So any of that stuff, if it's not happening here, I need to fix it. Or if the bad things are happening, I need to fix it. And if some of the good things that I want aren't happening, then I need to fix that too. And I find that if I really get this composition good and do a good job on this, then everything else kind of flows from that and will be made much easier. Okay, that's kind of the, there's one more little tiny one down here. Okay, so that's the big branches. Now I'll move to a smaller brush. You know what? Actually, I think I might switch to black here, because those smaller branches typically are black, and I don't want to go in and try and have to darken them later. So let's switch to black for the smaller branches. And again, I want to, I'm not necessarily going exactly from my photo. At this point, it's more about design, composition, and how the eye moves through the painting. And another one here. Because this is a little tiny painting, I don't need a ton of this calligraphy of these branches. Just enough, and as I've mentioned before, enough is a very important thing in painting. And I mean, if I could sit there and articulate why certain things are enough or not enough, but really, it really is very much a feeling, because shapes and lines on the canvas make our eye do certain things, and so it's a kind of matter of looking to see if your eye is doing something you don't want it to do, and if it is, you need to fix it. And we got some, this is actually coming from behind here. Okay, because I want these to appear that they're coming from these trees from behind. some shorter trees, or these would actually be distant trees that are only coming up partially as high as these foreground trees. And we've got some branches over here, and these also lead the eye in, and this is also blocking the corners. Anytime you have a diagonal that goes across the corner, that keeps the eye from moving out of the canvas, which is typically something we want to do. Now a lot of this area is going to be covered with foliage, so this is not too crucial. I just want this kind of happening in the background so that wherever the sky shows through, we have the opportunity to break up some of these areas of sky with branches. And what we got here, we've got some branches coming off there, and we've also got some evergreen. You know what, there is a little kind of cedar tree in here, or pine tree, so let's indicate that with these horizontal branches. In there, maybe just a couple of these black trees, because I can actually see them happening in the, they're kind of in the background poking through, and I think there's actually a pine tree, so if I want to indicate some of those pine branches, I need to have a pine tree trunk kind of going through there. Okay, I'm actually getting very close to done here. You can see I don't actually take a lot of time to block in these. I think maybe something overlapping out here. And at this stage too, it's kind of like the more I do of this, the kind of more closed in the overall impact of this painting will be. The less branches I put in there, the more open it will be. But I do want it to remain fairly open in this area here. That's what I really like about the actual photo. This whole area here is kind of open, but we do have some foliage coming out there, so maybe a thin branch there and there. Okay, and just a few horizontal branches off this pine tree. Now at this stage too, you know, nothing is actually determined in terms of depth, in terms of which is behind which. So mostly this tree I know is going to be in front of everything. There's going to be a few pine boughs cutting in front of this birch tree, and this birch tree. So let's actually maybe have one more small pine tree here with just a few of these little branches, and we need a few more coming out here. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. I'm going to, I'm going to block the sun in, actually between these two trees down here. So I actually do need just a few more thin branch or tree shapes down here to kind of outline the sun, because I don't want the sun just sitting all by itself with nothing kind of surrounding it. That's what helps really create that sun effect, is having branches around and going through the sun. Okay, so I'm going to drop my sun in there. Yeah, well, I guess the one last thing I have to do. Now, a lot of this, the foliage in here is very light, so I don't think I really need to go in and block that in with the acrylic, but maybe I will as far as just where the pine trees are. And these are just kind of poking. This one's just, it's one of those pine trees that only has a lot of foliage up top because it doesn't get much light down in the bottom of the forest. So just that little bit on the top of the tree. And this one here, just a few of these little boughs, but this is one of these little, I don't know if it's actually a tamarack tree or if it's actually a pine tree, but I'm just going to suggest a little bit of the foliage on the pine tree. And same with this one here. I could actually just do this in the oil paint, but it just helped to remind me that when I go to painting it that I need to indicate some of these branch shapes. Where was that? Okay. And over here. And so you can see this often kind of changes on the fly. I wasn't actually planning on doing any pine trees, but just as I look more at the photo, I can see they're there, and I actually think they add to it having some of these darks. On this pine tree, maybe just a few more branches here. How are we doing for time? Oh, it's 16 minutes. So I just want some of these pine branches to overlap. We got coming out here, maybe this as well. At this stage I can get carried away, so I sometimes have to make myself stop, which I think is probably a good thing. Maybe just a couple more branches. And at this point, again, I look at all of these as just ways of leading the eye into the painting. And I think that's it for blocking this one, and I'll come back. How are we doing there? 17 minutes. Now, you know what? I think I might actually end this here. I don't think I've ever done one where I've blocked in an entire composition, although I will show you how I do the sun in terms of blocking it in. If I can find my gesso. So again, because I'm painting in acrylic, which is a water-soluble medium, and gesso, for those of you who don't know, is basically what's used to prepare a canvas. So by blocking that in now, it kind of sets that in the composition, and if I don't like the placement, I can actually change it before I start painting in oils. And so I want the sun just basically touching both of these birch trees. And I've gotten very good at drawing circles, which is actually more tricky than you would think. If you're doing something like this yourself and you find it really difficult to draw a circle freehand, then you can maybe take something. I used to, when I first started and had trouble drawing the circles, I would take like a small bottle cap or something, and then using a pencil kind of use that to trace out the circle shape. Now this is one of my favorite tools. This is a Q-tip. So you can see I've got a little kind of error on that circle, and while the gesso is still wet, I can come in and make slight corrections to my sun, but that's actually pretty good. And again, because the sun, when I actually painted it, kind of gradates from the white to the very light yellow to the yellow. This is a hard outline of the sun, but when it's actually in the finished painting, it will softly grade out. So if it's not an exact perfect circle, that's not a big problem, but you don't want it to have an oval. Oh, one thing I remember someone said when we were away, I had a sun that was way up in the corner, and he said, oh, it should be more of an ellipse because you're looking at it at an angle, thinking that the sun is in fact a circle. It's not, it's a sphere. So no matter what angle you're looking at the sun from, if it's the full sun, it should always be as close to a perfect circle as possible because it's a sphere, not a disc. Okay, I think I'm going to call it here. That's 20 minutes. So yeah, I think this is the first time I've actually gone right from start to finish in the block-in. So hopefully it gives you a little glimpse into my mind in terms of what I'm thinking, and just in terms of how loose compared to how tight I am when I'm doing this. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have, give me a thumbs up and like this. I encourage you to share it with your friends. Welcome your comments and questions. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I'm Tim Packer, and I thank you for your time.